They think I'm invisible, Vivian Harper whispered to herself as she stepped out of the sleek black car and onto the marble steps of the Grand Starlight Hotel, the heels of her emerald green dress clicking softly against the polished stone, each step a quiet defiance. The gala lights reflected off crystal chandeliers, casting golden spears across the room, while the low hum of expensive perfume and murmured conversations wrapped around her like a velvet curtain, teasing, taunting, daring her to falter. But she didn't, her back straight, shoulders squared, the memory of every sneer, every dismissive glance from the past fueling the calm fire in her chest. Across the room, Logan Pierce laughed with his new partner, oblivious to the storm building in the center of the gala. The sharp lines of his tailored tuxedo, the practiced ease of his charm, all meant to reinforce the image of his world. A world from which he assumed she had been erased, yet with every measured breath Vivian reminded herself that she had rewritten the rules quietly, invisibly. The empire she now commanded a silent promise that she would no longer be overlooked. As she glided past tables of champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres meticulously arranged on silver platters, she noticed the subtle shifts in the crowd. A head turned here, a stifled whisper there, but no one dared meet her gaze directly, as though sensing the weight of the truth she carried, the power that had grown in the shadows while the world assumed she had faded. Her eyes met Mr. Donovan's, the gala host, standing at the edge of the grand ballroom with a small, knowing smile, his posture a quiet signal that tonight was not just another event, but a stage set for revelation. She felt the pulse of anticipation tighten in her chest, a mixture of exhilaration and nerve, the familiar adrenaline of a moment that could redefine everything she had endured. The scent of polished marble, sandalwood, and fresh orchids filled her senses. As she breathed in the opulence, each element a reminder that she belonged here not by chance, but through her own skill and perseverance. She passed beneath the glittering canopy of lights, her emerald dress catching them like liquid fire, drawing subtle glances from the most influential figures in the room, though still none daring to approach, the suspense thick as velvet air. Every whispered comment she caught on the periphery, hinting at curiosity, suspicion, and perhaps envy. Vivian paused briefly, adjusting the delicate diamond necklace that lay against her collarbone, feeling the weight of history settle into a tense calm. The unspoken knowledge that Logan believed she was nothing now, that she would remain sidelined and ignored, and she let herself smile faintly. A private acknowledgement of the truth he would soon discover. She was more powerful, more in control, and infinitely more dangerous to his assumptions than he could possibly imagine. The gala's glittering chaos serving as the perfect canvas for her quiet, commanding presence. The opening act of a reckoning that would leave the entire room holding its collective breath as the first scene of her return began to unfold before them all. As Vivian Harper moved further into the gala, the soft murmur of conversations and clinking glasses formed a distant background, a rhythmic pulse against the steady beat of her own determination. She felt the eyes of high society upon her, curious, unsettled, yet hesitant to approach, as if sensing the unspoken authority she carried, the quiet dominance that had grown from years of careful planning and unwavering focus. The empire she had built in silence now poised to manifest in a single, unmistakable statement. She weaved gracefully past clusters of guests adorned in silk and velvet, each step measured, each motion deliberate, the hem of her emerald dress trailing slightly behind her, catching the light like liquid fire, reflecting the patience and strategy that had led to this moment, the careful acquisition of influence, connections, and resources that no one present had anticipated. Across the room, Logan Pierce smiled, speaking animatedly with the event coordinator, his voice sharp and confident. But there was a subtle tension in the angle of his shoulders, the slight narrowing of his eyes, a hint that even he felt the shift in energy as Vivian glided past, a silent herald of change that even the most confident could not ignore. She passed the grand staircase, noting the polished wood, the wrought iron balustrade, and the golden light cascading from the chandeliers above. all elements orchestrated to impress, yet none able to conceal the quiet power that emanated from her, the aura of someone who had endured humiliation and dismissal, only to emerge stronger and more in control than anyone could have imagined. Her mind traced the journey that had led her here. Nights spent poring over contracts, late afternoons building alliances, careful negotiations in boardrooms and cafes alike, each decision laying the groundwork for a future where she would no longer be a footnote in someone else's story, each step a brick in the foundation of her reclaimed authority. As she moved toward the center of the ballroom, the subtle shifting of attention became more pronounced, whispers brushing against her ears, glances darting between her and the host, Mr. Donovan, who observed with a composed smile, the subtle acknowledgement that he, too, understood the significance of her presence and the moment that was about to unfold. She allowed herself a small, controlled breath, feeling the pulse of anticipation thrumming in her veins, the collected eyes of the elite, the murmurs of speculation, and the electricity of potential recognition building around her, all converging on the point where preparation, patience, and power would intersect. Each passing second heightened the suspense. The subtle movements of servers balancing trays of champagne, the delicate clink of crystal, the soft laughter of socialites, all underscoring the contrast between the facade of celebration and the underlying tension, the invisible stage upon which Vivian Harper had already claimed her role, unseen but undeniable, ready for the revelation that would shift every assumption in the room. With each careful step, she felt the weight of expectation, the unspoken challenges, and the anticipation of a crowd unprepared for the force of quiet authority she wielded, a calculated presence that promised to turn attention, perception, and power toward her with a single, decisive moment. The grand ballroom fell into a hushed anticipation as Mr. Donovan stepped forward, his voice smooth and deliberate, carrying over the soft strains of the orchestra. Ladies and gentlemen, the true steward of this enterprise, the individual who has quietly built its foundation and safeguarded its legacy, please welcome Vivian Harper. And the words echoed like a bell through the room, drawing every eye, every whispered conversation to a single point of focus. Vivian lifted her chin, the soft emerald folds of her dress catching the golden light, a subtle gleam dancing across her diamond necklace. And for the first time in this space, she felt the weight of unchallenged authority, the culmination of years spent in quiet diligence, in strategy and vision, each connection nurtured, each decision calculated, all converging to this moment where recognition could no longer be denied. Logan Pierce froze mid-step, the smile he had worn for the crowd faltering as the realization struck, eyes widening, jaw tightening, his previous confidence evaporating under the undeniable clarity of Vivian's presence, the truth of her power radiating in a calm, controlled manner that left him incapable of distraction or denial. The chatter of the Gala ceased, the soft clinking of crystal suspended in the air, and all that remained was the elegance of light reflecting off polished marble, the subtle fragrance of orchids, and the quiet, commanding figure at the center of it all, poised with an air of authority that no amount of past belittlement could diminish. Vivian's gaze swept across the stunned crowd, taking in the subtle shifts in posture, the half-turned heads, the suppressed murmurs, the realization in the eyes of influential guests that the person they had underestimated, the one they had thought sidelined, had not only returned but had returned with a presence that demanded acknowledgement, a presence that redefined the power dynamic in the room without a single raised voice, a single gesture of aggression, simply by the weight of her achievements and the elegance with which she carried them. Logan's hand twitched slightly at his side, the air between them thick with unspoken recognition of the reversal, a tension that spoke louder than any words could, as if the room itself had shifted, to acknowledge the rightful owner, the architect of the empire who had been overlooked and dismissed for far too long, and now stood undeniably at the pinnacle of influence. Every chandelier, every reflective surface, every echo of laughter or whispered admiration seemed to pivot toward her, an unintentional chorus that underscored the silent statement of her success, the quiet yet commanding assertion of authority that no one could ignore. And as she allowed herself a measured, almost imperceptible smile, a private acknowledgement of the years of perseverance, of strategy, of careful planning that had led to this reveal, there was a palpable sense of completion in the air, the first act of her return fulfilled, yet hinting at further revelations to come, a story that had only begun to unfold. The audience poised on the edge of understanding the full depth of Vivian Harper's reclaimed position and the subtle, inescapable power she now wielded. The room seemed to hold its breath as Vivian Harper allowed herself a subtle shift in posture, a small, controlled gesture that radiated confidence and ownership, the kind that did not demand attention but inevitably drew it. Guests who had been previously indifferent found themselves instinctively turning, curiosity rippling across the ballroom like the delicate flutter of silk drapes in a gentle breeze. The polished marble floors reflecting the golden light from the chandeliers above, and in that reflected glow, Vivian saw the faces of those who had once dismissed her, their expressions caught between surprise and reluctant admiration, a silent acknowledgement of the authority she now exuded. Logan Pierce, standing slightly to the side, could not tear his gaze away, the careful composure he had cultivated over years of self-assured performance beginning to falter. The realization sinking in that the world he had attempted to define, without her, was subtly and irreversibly shifting around her. Presence, every glance, every pause, every whispered comment, an unspoken concession to the power she wielded without overt declaration. As Vivian moved through the crowd, her steps deliberate, measured, each placement of her heel on the marble resonating with quiet command, she noted the subtle gestures of recognition from influential figures, small nods, quick glances of respect, murmured exchanges of speculation about her sudden emergence at the center of attention, all highlighting the contrast between the public performance of the gala and the private acknowledgement of her accomplishments, the intricate tapestry of influence and preparation she had woven in the shadows coming to full illumination. She allowed her eyes to rest briefly on Mr. Donovan, the host, whose composed demeanor concealed a hint of approval, a knowing smile that seemed to silently narrate the story of her rise from obscurity to command, reinforcing the realization among the guests that her presence was not incidental, that the empire she had quietly nurtured had found its voice through her alone. The subtle rustle of gowns, the soft clinking of crystal, and the gentle hum of conversations resumed. Yet they now carried a different energy, a recognition that the dynamics of the room had irrevocably shifted, that the quiet, precise authority Vivian exuded had set a new standard, and that the attention she commanded was both inevitable and unassailable. As she paused near the center of the ballroom, a faint smile touched her lips, not one of triumph and arrogance, but of calm satisfaction, a silent message that she had reclaimed her space and rewritten the narrative, her journey from dismissal to recognition fully realized in the eyes of those who had underestimated her, and yet leaving an unspoken promise that the full story of her ascent and the empire she commanded had only just begun to unfold, the anticipation lingering in the air like a charged current waiting for the next spark. Vivian Harper allowed herself to drift closer to the center of the ballroom, her presence commanding attention without a single overt gesture, the soft shimmer of her emerald dress reflecting the warm chandelier light onto the polished marble, casting subtle glimmers across the attentive faces around her. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, low and hesitant at first, then growing as realization dawned. As guests shifted subtly in their seats or along the perimeter, eyes darting toward her, trying to reconcile the memory of a woman once dismissed with the undeniable force of her current presence. Logan Pierce's confident posture stiffened, the easy smile he had cultivated faltering into a tense line, a subtle tightening of his jaw as he absorbed the breadth of the moment. The unspoken truth that the narrative he had controlled for years was quietly unraveling before the gaze of every influential figure present. Vivian's own breath remained steady, each inhale and exhale. Measured, deliberate, a rhythm that mirrored the pulse of anticipation swelling in the room. A silent beat of authority that seemed to draw the room's attention naturally toward her without effort. A command not demanded, but acknowledged by instinct. Her eyes scanned the sea of elegantly dressed guests, noting the minor gestures of recognition. A slight nod here, a lifted eyebrow there. The faint inclinations of heads acknowledging her quiet dominance. The subtle acknowledgments that her calculated patience and the years of strategic planning had culminated in a presence that could not be overlooked or ignored. She recalled the long hours in offices, in quiet study, negotiating contracts, forming alliances, building influence quietly in the background while the world assumed she had vanished. Each decision, each step, each carefully nurtured connection converging at this precise moment, crystallizing into a force of presence that required no announcement beyond her entrance and measured movement through the grand space. The subtle rustle of fabrics, the muted clink of champagne glasses, the soft murmurs that arose and fell like gentle waves, all underscored the tension between the previous assumptions and the reality of her return, the silent power she now held, and the anticipation of further revelation, all of which seemed to orbit around her without her needing to lift a hand. Logan's glance flicked toward her, an unspoken understanding passing between them. A recognition of change he could neither contest nor redirect. A truth that the ballroom, the chandeliers, the elegant fixtures, and the attentive crowd all bore witness to, reinforcing the gravity of her reclaimed authority. Vivian's lips curved into a faint, controlled smile, a subtle acknowledgement of the triumph built not on confrontation, but on precision, patience, and intellect. A statement that spoke louder than any overt declaration could, and as she allowed the current of attention to settle around her, the room seemed to bend imperceptibly, subtly realigning itself to her presence, the first step of the evening's quiet, commanding revelation complete, yet hinting at the story that was still unfolding, one carefully orchestrated moment at a time. The soft hum of conversations resumed in the grand ballroom, yet every sound seemed measured against the commanding presence of Vivian Harper as she continued her steady walk across the marble floors, the gentle rustle of her emerald silk gown punctuating the otherwise delicate rhythm of the gala. She noted the subtle shifts of attention around her, heads turning just slightly, a delicate narrowing of eyes, a whispered exchange of words that hinted at curiosity, disbelief, and a dawning awareness of her authority, the invisible gravity she exerted without force, a presence built on years of quiet strategy and patient execution. Logan Pierce remained to the side, his carefully composed demeanor showing faint cracks as he watched her navigate the room. The contrast between his overt confidence and her understated dominance impossible to ignore. The subtle tension in his shoulders betraying the recognition that the rules of the evening had shifted irrevocably in her favor. The scent of fresh orchids mingled with polished wood and the faint aroma of champagne, creating a sensory backdrop that seemed to underscore every deliberate step she took, each movement measured, graceful, a testament to control and the quiet assertion of power without confrontation. Vivian's gaze scanned the crowd, observing minor gestures of acknowledgement, the subtle nod here, the slight inclination of a head there, a quiet acknowledgement of the truth she carried with her, the empire she had cultivated, the influence she had quietly amassed, and the mastery of her position in a social sphere that had once dismissed her as irrelevant. She paused for a brief moment near the center of the room, letting the energy of the gala flow around her, the soft glitter of chandeliers reflecting across crystal glasses, the muted clink of fine china, the carefully composed laughter of high society, all serving as a delicate symphony highlighting the shift in dynamics, her calm presence acting as both anchor and signal, a visual and emotional focal point that none could ignore. Mr. Donovan, observing from a discreet distance, gave the slightest tilt of his head, a subtle acknowledgement that the orchestration of the evening, the placement, timing, and visibility, had achieved the intended effect, and Vivian, sensing the culmination of her preparation, allowed herself the faintest, imperceptible smile, a controlled recognition of the quiet power she had asserted, a reminder that true authority often required patience and strategy rather than spectacle. Every guest present, consciously or not, became part of the silent acknowledgement, their expressions, gestures, and posture testaments to the recalibration of influence and attention, as if the room itself had acknowledged her presence as both central and commanding, the apex of a carefully constructed social narrative. The soft shimmer of her dress, the poised carriage of her frame, the unspoken command of her gaze, all combined to create a tableau of elegance and quiet power, a narrative unfolding without words, a subtle yet unmistakable declaration of her mastery of both the evening and the perception of those around her. Vivian took another measured step, the polished heels clicking softly and the ambient light catching the edges of her jewelry. Each glint a punctuation mark of intent, a reminder that her journey had transformed her not just in presence, but in perception. And as the murmurs of realization rippled through the room, the evening hung in delicate balance, a moment suspended between recognition and anticipation, the next revelation of her strategy waiting just beyond the awareness of those who had once underestimated her. Vivian Harper paused near the sweeping staircase, allowing the soft murmur of the gala to wash over her as she let her gaze drift across the room, noticing subtle shifts in posture, fleeting glances of surprise, and the faintest hints of admiration that had begun to ripple through the crowd. Every movement was deliberate, each step measured as the polished marble reflected the chandeliers above, the warm golden light catching the emerald silk of her dress and casting a glow that seemed to emphasize the quiet authority she now wielded, a presence that needed no announcement yet demanded recognition. Logan Pierce lingered nearby, his carefully crafted confidence waning under the unspoken realization that the narrative he had controlled for years was quietly unraveling, the smirk he had perfected fading into a rigid line of awareness, his eyes unable to ignore the deliberate elegance with which Vivian commanded attention, the unmistakable aura of someone who had quietly rebuilt power in the shadows and now stepped into the light with undeniable authority. She allowed her eyes to meet those of key figures in the room, their subtle nods and quick, measured glances a silent acknowledgement of her influence and achievements, the careful planning, the alliances, and the persistent patience culminating in a presence that now eclipsed the assumptions of the past. And as she continued through the ballroom, the soft click of her heels against the marble punctuated the quiet rhythm of control and precision, each step an assertion of her position, a visual representation of the authority she had reclaimed. The delicate scent of orchids mingled with polished wood and faint traces of champagne, creating an atmosphere that accentuated the elegance and gravity of the moment, the space seeming to bend subtly around her as she moved, drawing attention effortlessly, not through spectacle, but through the quiet weight of accomplishment and meticulous preparation. Mr. Donovan observed from the edge of the room, his composed demeanor concealing a slight lift of the brow, a subtle sign of approval, as though the orchestration of the evening, the careful alignment of attention and timing, had achieved the effect he anticipated, and Vivian, sensing the culmination of her presence and influence, allowed a brief, private smile, a controlled expression of satisfaction and recognition, knowing that the shift in perception was complete, yet still pregnant with the promise of further revelations. Whispers floated through the crowd, tentative and curious, as the guests began to recalibrate their perception of the room. The subtle energy of acknowledgement now settling into a steady current. Around her, each observer caught between the memory of the woman once overlooked and the reality of the authority she now exuded, the quiet power that could not be ignored and demanded a rethinking of assumptions and expectations. And as Vivian Harper continued to navigate the ballroom, every measured movement, every glance and gesture reinforced the silent declaration of mastery, the reclamation of presence, and the poised promise that the story of her influence and authority was far from concluded, a narrative that had only just begun to unfold before those who had once doubted, underestimated, or ignored her. Vivian Harper moved with composed grace through the remaining space of the gala, her presence drawing subtle attention from every corner. The soft rustle of her emerald gown punctuating each careful step as she navigated past clusters of guests whose hushed whispers betrayed their curiosity and surprise. The chandeliers above cast a warm, golden glow over the polished marble floor, catching the delicate folds of her dress and reflecting the quiet command she now exerted over the room, a power born of patience, strategy, and resilience. The invisible threads of influence she had woven now made visible through the measured confidence of her movements. Logan Pierce lingered near the far side of the room, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on Vivian with a mix of disbelief and reluctant acknowledgement. The effortless authority she exuded contrasting sharply with his previously assumed control, a subtle reminder of the miscalculations he had made in underestimating her, and the careful construction of her return to prominence. Each guest she passed seemed to realign subtly in response, glances exchanged in silent recognition of her quiet dominance. The soft murmur of conversation acting as a backdrop to the unspoken understanding that the dynamics of the evening had shifted, that Vivian Harper had asserted a presence that demanded acknowledgement without a word, a gesture, or a confrontation. The air carried the scent of orchids and fresh linens, mingling with a faint aroma of champagne, creating an atmosphere rich with elegance and understated tension. The interplay of fragrance, light, and sound heightening the sense of anticipation as Vivian moved toward the center of attention. The subtle glimmer of her diamond necklace catching the light like a punctuation mark on her carefully orchestrated appearance. Mr. Donovan observed from a discreet vantage point, his composed expression betraying only the faintest lift of an eyebrow, a sign of approval for the execution of a meticulously planned emergence, his understanding of timing and presence aligning perfectly with Vivian's quiet assertion of authority, reinforcing the impact of her calculated return to visibility as she paused briefly. Allowing her eyes to sweep across the room, she noted the subtle gestures of acknowledgement, the slight inclinations of heads, the momentary hesitations in movement, all signaling the recognition of her position and influence, the carefully curated power she had built in. Private now unmistakably evident in public, a presence that shifted perception and recalibrated assumptions in real time. The gentle click of her heels on marble, the soft sway of her dress, and the deliberate composure in her posture combined to create a tableau of elegance, strength, and quiet dominance, a silent yet potent statement of her regained influence and command over the social sphere. Vivian's gaze lingered for a moment on Logan, catching the subtle tension in his expression, the awareness of change etched in his posture, a reminder that power can be reclaimed not through confrontation, but through patience, resilience, and deliberate action. The energy of the gala continued to pulse around her, the ambient sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and low conversation serving as both backdrop and amplifier to the unmistakable force of her presence. And as she allowed herself the smallest, controlled smile, it was clear that every assumption about who she was and what she commanded had been quietly overturned, the story of her return unfolding with precision and inevitability, a narrative of subtle yet undeniable triumph. Vivian Harper allowed herself a brief pause near the grand staircase, letting her eyes sweep over the gathered guests once more, noting the subtle shifts of attention, the quiet tilt of heads, the hesitant glances exchanged as if the room itself was recognizing the recalibrated balance of influence, the invisible currents of power she now navigated with effortless control. The soft murmur of conversation continued, punctuated by the delicate clinking of crystal and the rustle of fine fabrics. Each sound a reminder of the elegance and refinement of the evening. Yet beneath the surface of civility, the energy had shifted, the room now attuned to her presence. Acknowledging the authority she quietly asserted with each measured step and graceful movement. Logan Pierce remained at the periphery, his composure faltering under the weight of the unspoken acknowledgement from the crowd, the confidence he had relied upon now tempered by the undeniable reality of Vivian's reclaimed position, a reminder that the assumptions of the past held no power over the present. Vivian's gaze lingered momentarily on Mr. Donovan, whose subtle nod conveyed both approval and recognition that the orchestration of her emergence had achieved the intended effect, a silent affirmation that the careful timing, the measured presence, and the deliberate pacing had shifted perception and established a new equilibrium in the room. She continued through the ballroom with quiet determination, her emerald dress catching the light and reflecting it in soft glimmers across the polished marble. The movement deliberate, every step a silent statement of authority and control, a visual representation of the meticulous planning, strategic patience, and resilience that had guided her rise from dismissal to recognition as she passed clusters of guests. She noted the nuanced responses, half smiles, subtle nods, fleeting expressions of surprise and respect, each an acknowledgement of her influence and the undeniable presence she now commanded, a careful interplay of observation and action that reinforced her authority without a word spoken. The ambient sounds of the gala, the gentle hum of conversations, the soft laughter, the faint clink of glasses, formed a subtle symphony around her, accentuating her measured movements and the understated yet compelling assertion of power, a presence that drew attention naturally, the room itself seeming to bend slightly toward her as she navigated the space. She allowed her eyes to sweep over the crowd, registering the quiet transformations in perception, the gradual acknowledgement that the woman once overlooked now held a commanding presence that redefined the social landscape of the evening. The careful balance of elegance, patience, and deliberate visibility producing an effect far greater than any overt declaration could achieve. The soft shimmer of her jewelry, the poised carriage of her frame, and the calm authority of her gaze combined to create a tableau of understated dominance, a narrative unfolding in real time. The story of her influence and mastery evident in the reactions and subtle gestures of those around her, a reminder that power can be reclaimed with quiet precision, resilience, and unspoken confidence. And as Vivian Harper allowed a faint, controlled smile to touch her lips, it served as both a private acknowledgement of her achievements and a gentle promise that the full extent of her presence, her authority, and the story of her quiet triumph was only beginning to reveal itself to the attentive eyes in the room. The atmosphere in the ballroom shifted subtly as Vivian Harper took deliberate steps toward the center of attention, her emerald dress catching the ambient light and scattering it in soft, elegant glimmers across the polished marble, the delicate rustle of silk a quiet accompaniment to the measured rhythm of her movements. She sensed the collective awareness of the guests, the nuanced glances, the hesitant repositioning of chairs and feet, a silent acknowledgement that the balance of influence had tilted irrevocably in her favor, the social fabric of the gala now subtly woven around her presence, commanding attention without a single raised voice. Logan Pierce stood slightly apart, his posture rigid, the careful poise he had maintained for years faltering as he observed Vivian navigate the room with ease. The calm authority she exuded highlighting the contrast between her quiet mastery and the performative confidence he had relied upon. A reminder that influence and recognition are often earned in silence and patience rather than claimed through assertion. The soft murmur of conversations, the faint clink of crystal, and the subtle laughter of well-dressed guests underscore the elegant tension in the air, a background symphony to the quiet, commanding presence that Vivian projected, each sound amplifying the realization that she had arrived not merely as a participant, but as a central force. The culmination of careful strategy and meticulous preparation manifesting in every poised gesture and measured glance. She allowed herself a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the ambient energy settle around her, the attention of key figures aligning with her presence, subtle nods, fleeting expressions of surprise, and tentative smiles, forming a web of recognition that reinforced the authority she had quietly established. Each acknowledgement a testament to the work she had undertaken to reclaim not just status, but respect and influence within this elite circle. As Vivian moved with unhurried grace, her eyes scanned the room, registering the micro shifts in posture and expression, the subtle recalibration of attention as every guest processed the quiet assertion of her power. The way her presence seemed to orient the space itself, drawing focus naturally without overt effort or ostentation. The interplay of light, movement, and elegance creating a palpable current of anticipation that pulsed through the room. Mr. Donovan observed from his vantage point, the faintest lift of his brow signaling approval, the orchestration of the evening, unfolding precisely as intended, the subtle choreography of attention, timing, and presence aligning perfectly with Vivian's quiet yet undeniable command. She let her gaze linger on Logan for a fleeting moment, noting the tension in his expression, the awareness of change etched into his posture, an acknowledgement without words that the dynamics had shifted, and then she allowed herself the faintest, controlled smile. A silent assertion of triumph and mastery, a promise that the unfolding story of influence, recognition, and quiet power was far from concluded, and that the narrative she had begun to shape would continue to command the attention of all present with every subtle movement and deliberate decision she made. The grand ballroom seemed to hold its breath as Vivian Harper stepped forward, her gaze sweeping the room with quiet authority, the emerald silk of her gown shimmering softly under the warm glow of the chandeliers, casting glimmers across polished marble and reflecting in the eyes of guests who were now fully aware of the shift in dynamics. Every step she took was deliberate, measured, a subtle assertion of influence that drew the attention of those around her without a single word, the soft click of her heels punctuating the rhythm of power she carried effortlessly, a testament to the patience, strategy, and resilience that had brought her to this precise moment. Logan Pierce remained at the periphery, his previously confident posture now tense, the realization dawning that the narrative he had controlled for years had been quietly but decisively rewritten, his attempts at composure betraying only a faint tightening of the jaw and a subtle narrowing of eyes as he observed the undeniable presence Vivian projected. The murmurs among the guests grew quieter, curiosity and respect interweaving with surprise, the subtle nods and half-smiles acknowledging her authority and the mastery with which she navigated the social landscape, a dance of perception and influence that required neither confrontation nor ostentation, simply the weight of accomplishment and the elegance with which it was carried. The scent of orchids mingled with the faint traces of champagne and polished wood, the delicate background of the gala emphasizing the gravity of the moment, each sensory detail underscoring the impact of Vivian's presence, a presence built on years of meticulous effort, careful alliances, and the quiet cultivation of respect and influence, now visible to all who had once doubted or ignored her. As she moved through the crowd, her eyes met those of key figures who had once dismissed her, their expressions caught between astonishment and recognition, subtle gestures of acknowledgement forming a silent chorus of affirmation that reinforced the authority she now wielded, a command of attention that required nothing but the controlled elegance of her movements and the calm confidence of her demeanor. Mr. Donovan, observing from a discreet distance, offered the slightest tilt of his head, a silent affirmation that the orchestration of the evening had achieved its intended effect, that the careful alignment of timing, presence, and perception had elevated Vivian to a position of central influence, visible yet unchallenged, commanding without demanding. The ambient hum of conversation, the gentle clinking of glasses, and the soft rustle of gowns seemed to orbit around her, each sound accentuating the subtle power she held, the attention she commanded naturally, a quiet yet undeniable shift in the room's energy. She allowed herself a faint, controlled smile, an acknowledgement of the careful work and strategic patience that had brought her here, a private affirmation of triumph that needed no audience, yet carried an unmistakable message to all present that the woman once overlooked was now the quiet epicenter of influence and authority. Her story only beginning to unfold before the eyes of those who had underestimated her. The room poised on the edge of further revelations that would continue to command attention with the same deliberate, elegant authority. Vivian Harper stood at the center of the grand ballroom, the golden glow from the chandeliers highlighting the folds of her emerald gown as she surveyed the assembled guests with calm authority, each face reflecting a mixture of surprise, admiration, and subtle curiosity at the woman who had quietly reclaimed her place among them. Logan Pierce remained slightly to the side, his composure strained. The confidence he had carried with ease now tempered by the undeniable presence of Vivian, whose elegance, poise, and quiet command of the room left no doubt that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. The soft hum of conversations continued, punctuated by the gentle clinking of crystal and the faint rustle of designer fabrics. Yet every sound seemed to orbit around her, reinforcing the magnetic pull of her authority and the awareness that she had become the center of attention without uttering a single word or demanding it through. Theatrics, she allowed herself to take a slow, deliberate breath, letting the rhythm of the room settle around her as she observed the nuanced reactions of guests, the slight inclinations of heads, the fleeting expressions of recognition, all signaling the acknowledgement of her influence and the unspoken acceptance that she now commanded a position of distinction, authority, and respect that had been meticulously earned through patience, strategy, and unwavering focus. Mr. Donovan watched from a discreet vantage point, his subtle nod of approval confirming that the orchestration of the evening had achieved its full effect, the careful alignment of timing, movement, and visibility ensuring that Vivian's presence resonated throughout the space with a quiet yet undeniable impact, the guests responding instinctively to the aura of control and mastery she projected as Vivian moved slowly through the ballroom, the polished marble reflecting the soft shimmer of her jewelry and the subtle glints from the chandeliers. She noted the shifting attention of influential figures, their expressions alternating between astonishment and tentative respect, their gestures, small nods, quick glances, the subtle turning of bodies, communicating recognition of the authority she held, a presence cultivated and refined over years of careful effort and deliberate action. The delicate scent of fresh orchids mixed with traces of champagne and polished wood, a sensory backdrop that underscored the elegance and weight of the moment, while the gentle rhythm of ambient conversation and movement highlighted the understated yet compelling power she now wielded, a presence that guided perception and commanded respect without confrontation or ostentation. Her gaze met that of Logan briefly, noting the tension in his posture, the faint tightening of his jaw, and the unspoken acknowledgement of the shift in influence and control, a recognition of the quiet reclamation of space and authority that he could neither contest nor redirect, and she allowed the subtlest of smiles to touch her lips, a private acknowledgement of the triumph and precision that had brought her to this point, as the guests continued to adjust to the reality of her presence, the soft shimmer of her dress, the poised carriage of her frame, and the deliberate cadence of her movements combined to create a tableau of power, elegance, and control, each element reinforcing the narrative of a woman who had endured dismissal, cultivated influence, and now commanded attention with a grace that left an indelible impression on all who witnessed it. And as Vivian Harper allowed herself to breathe in the atmosphere, the subtle interplay of light, sound, and perception surrounding her, it became clear that the quiet mastery she had asserted would shape not only the remainder of the evening, but the ongoing perception of her presence, influence, and authority in ways both immediate and enduring, a testament to the strategic patience and resilience that had brought her to this moment of recognition and poised triumph. Vivian Harper finally reached the center of the ballroom, the soft glow of chandeliers dancing across the polished marble and catching every subtle shimmer of her emerald gown, her posture radiating quiet authority that drew all attention effortlessly toward her. The murmurs of guests had shifted into a collective pause, the subtle rustle of fabrics and the gentle clink of glasses forming a delicate soundtrack to the tension and admiration that now hung in the air. Every eye tracing her movements, registering the elegance, confidence, and power that had quietly reclaimed the space once dominated by assumptions and dismissals. Logan Pierce stood slightly behind, his posture tight, the carefully constructed veneer of ease beginning to falter as he absorbed the undeniable presence of a woman who had transformed silence and patience into influence, her calm gaze sweeping the room with precision, acknowledging the subtle gestures of recognition, half smiles, slight nods, and whispered exchanges, all indicators of the social recalibration her emergence had created. Mr. Donovan, observing from his vantage point, offered the faintest nod of approval, the orchestration of the evening having achieved its intended effect, the careful timing, placement, and visibility now culminating in an undeniable moment of acknowledgement and influence that required no additional declaration. The room itself responding to the authority Vivian quietly asserted as she allowed her eyes to drift across the faces of the guests. She noted the shifting expressions, the subtle realignment of attention and posture, a wave of respect and recognition washing through the crowd, the invisible currents of influence she had cultivated now made visible through the controlled elegance of her movements, the soft rhythm of her heels against the marble punctuating the quiet assertion of power she wielded effortlessly. The gentle scent of orchids combined with the faint traces of champagne and polished wood created an atmosphere of elegance and anticipation. Every sensory detail enhancing the subtle command of presence she projected, the interplay of light, sound, and observation reinforcing her authority and the understanding that the woman once overlooked now held a central, unchallenged position. She paused briefly, allowing a private acknowledgement of her journey to settle within her, the calculated patience, resilience, and quiet determination that had led her to this pinnacle of recognition and social influence, the room responding instinctively to the poise, confidence, and grace she embodied, her presence transforming perception and recalibrating assumptions without a word or gesture beyond the measured elegance she carried. Logan's gaze lingered on her, tension and realization reflected in his posture, the unspoken acknowledgement that control had shifted, and every guest around them absorbed the subtle yet powerful signal that Vivian Harper had not only returned, but had done so with an authority that could not be ignored. The story of her quiet mastery and reclaimed influence resonating in every movement, glance, and pause, leaving the room suspended in the acknowledgement of a triumph that was both understated and undeniably complete. And as Vivian allowed herself the faintest controlled smile, it was a private expression of calm victory, a testament to the strategy, patience, and resilience that had brought her to this moment. The narrative of her rise and quiet dominance concluding this stage of the evening while leaving an open promise that the full extent of her influence and the next chapters of her story would continue to unfold with precision, grace, and undeniable command.